When we think of a multinational corporation that deals in trillion-dollar worth, we often think of Google, Apple, or Amazon. But the largest, richest, and the most powerful organization existed long before any of these. It started on December 31st, 1600. Over 400 years ago, Queen of England signed a paper to start a sea trade company which had permissions to trade across the globe. It was known as East India Company. It served as a hybrid of a commercial organization and a nation state, profiting from spice, cotton, textiles. Their foundation was laid on trading with India, China, Indonesia, and Persia. Emily Erickson, a sociology professor at Yale University and author of Between Monopoly and Free Trade, says,
The English East India Company was the greatest business of its type. It was also larger than numerous countries. It was basically the de facto monarch of most of India, which at the time had one of the world's most productive economies.
But just as the English East India Company's trading dominance waned, in the late 18th century, it discovered a new purpose as an empire. It started to act as an empire in itself. And why not? They had all the tools for it. This company controlled a private army of 260,000 men, which was double the number of British army of the time. Those many men were able to drive away the remaining competition, acquire land, and pressure Indian kings into giving them taxation rights. On the final day of 1600, Queen Elizabeth I issued a charter to a group of merchants from London for exclusive foreign trading rights with the East Indies, a vast expanse of the globe, stretching from Africa's Cape of Good Hope eastward to Cape Horn in South America. This new English East India Company was a monopoly in the sense that no other British people could legally trade in this region yet. It faced fierce competition from the Spanish and the Portuguese, who already established trading outposts in India, as well as Dutch East Indies Company, which was created in the year 1602. England, like the rest of Western Europe, had a taste for exotic Eastern commodities such as spices, textiles, and jewelry. However, maritime expeditions to the East Indies were very dangerous, including violent confrontations with competing traders and terrible illnesses such as scurvy. According to Erickson,
the East India Company's staff fatality rate was shockingly high at 30%. The monopoly provided by the Royal Charter at least safeguarded London merchants from domestic competition while also ensuring a return for the Crown, which was desperately short of finances.
The East India Company popularized many of the traits of today's corporations. For example, the business was the largest and longest running joint stock company of its time, which meant it raised and pooled funds by selling shares to the general public. It was governed by both a president and a board of control or board of officers. The company didn't have dynastic settings, and this helped in keeping the company fair and profitable. While company's charter offered it an apparent monopoly in India, the company nevertheless permitted its workers to engage in private commerce on the side. Initially, the company didn't have much money to pay its employees for this extremely risky activity, so it had to offer additional incentives. The motive was to trade for their own private interests overseas. Erickson explains.
Employees of the East India Company traded both inside and outside of the company's restrictions. There were several possibilities to falsify, deceive, and smuggle. Consider jewelry, which is a very little and expensive item that you can easily hide on oneself.
Prior To East India Company, the majority of clothing in England was made of wool and meant for durability rather than fashion. However, this began to change when British markets were overwhelmed with low cost, finely woven cotton textiles from India, where each area produced cloth in a variety of colors and designs. When a new design debuted, it quickly became popular on London's streets. There is this prospect of being in the correct style that didn't exist previously, adds Erickson. Many historians believe this marks the birth of consumer culture in England when they brought in the cotton items. It created a new instability in what was popular. When the British and other European traders came in India, they had to gain favor with native monarchs and kings, including the strong Mughal Empire that stretched throughout the country. Even while the English East India Company was ostensibly a private company, its royal charter and battle-ready workforce gave it political clout. Indian kings summoned local company executives, took payments from them, and used the company's power in regional conflict, occasionally against French or Dutch. The Mughal Empire focused its authority in the interior of India, leaving coastal towns vulnerable to foreign influence. One of the primary reasons the East India Company required so much pooled finance was to conquer and fortify commercial outposts in port towns such as Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. When the Mughal Empire fell in the 18th century, conflict broke out in the interior, attracting more Indian merchants to the company. According to Tirthankar Roy, a professor of economic history at the London School of Economics and author of the East India Company, the world's most powerful corporation.
A firm is not a state. A corporation ruling in the name of the Crown cannot occur without the Crown's approval. Sovereignty became a major issue. In whose name will the firm create laws?
In most cases, the response came from the local branch officer of the East India Company. The London officer of the corporation was unconcerned by the Indian politics. Roy claims that as long as commerce continued, the board was satisfied and did not intervene, because there was limited contact between London and the branch officers. A letter took 3 months to travel. It was up to the branch officer to draft laws regulating company towns like Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, as well as to establish local police forces and court systems. The Maratha Empire, once a formidable force, became cornerstone in the British East India Company's path to dominance. The company's strategy involved a blend of military prowess, diplomacy, and exploiting Maratha divisions. Initial clashes led to mixed results, but the company's superior military tactics and weaponry gradually tilted the balance. The decisive blow came with the Third Anglo-Maratha War. In the year 1819, the British had officially defeated the Maratha Empire. This defeat shattered Maratha unity, and the one final Indian empire that stood between foreign conquest was gone. Now gradually, the British overtook the power from the princely states that were left. The exploits of East India Company didn't end in India. In one of its darkest chapters, the company smuggled opium into China in exchange for the country's most prized trade good, tea. China only traded tea for silver, but that was hard to come by in England, so the company flouted China's opium ban through a black market of Indian opium growers and smugglers. As tea flowed into London, the company's investors grew rich and millions of Chinese men wasted away in opium dens. When China cracked down on the opium trade, the British government sent warships, triggering the Opium War of 1840. The humiliating Chinese defeat handed the British control of Hong Kong, but the conflict shed further light on East India Company's dark dealings in the name of profit. Basically, East India Company began as a profitable sea trade route company, which ended up in controlling the richest nation the world had ever seen, India, and subsequently the second richest and the second oldest, which was the Chinese nation, was destroyed by influx of opium that was grown by Indian farmers on the orders of the British officials. We have all seen those scenes from Indian freedom struggle movies where British officials force Indian farmers to grow opium. And after the opium was grown, that was exported illegally into China. This resulted in generations of Chinese people struggling with opium addiction. According to studies, the English East India Company stole over $45 trillion worth out of India